Good morning. So, seen some comments on social media about the shooting of, I think his name's Jayland Walker in Akron. Of course, we've got, black male, quote-unquote unarmed, and, white police officer shooting him, so automatic recipe for controversy, right? And a lot of the comments I've seen center around the number of rounds that get shot at Walker. So, and that's a frequent point of contention for people, and I think I've touched on this before, but, people say, well, why so many rounds, right? And how is that reasonable? And doesn't that, or the implication is, doesn't it demonstrate some sort of malice or excessive force, or, especially when there's a racial component to it, bias or animus, and they're setting out to, seemingly make sure that this person does not survive, rather than, I don't know, use some lesser level of force, right? And I'll post a link to Akron put out, I think it was 13 different angles of body camera on this, as well as some closed circuit television, like traffic cameras and stuff like that, and kind of break down the timeline of the events and what exactly transpired. But in short, traffic stop, Walker flees, pursuit is on, Walker reportedly and seemingly in the video fires a shot out the window at the pursuing patrol cars. Eventually he bails out of the car, foot pursuit is on. A number of officers are chasing him on foot. He comes back at them, and that's when they fire, right? And in the video, I mean, it's a substantial amount of rounds that go down range. A loaded firearm was recovered in the vehicle, but he wasn't armed at the time that he was shot. So, inevitably, you have people who express, at a minimum, concern about, unarmed people getting shot, and then, like I said, the round count, right? So here's a couple things to consider when we're watching this. And I posted a video before, I think it was a shooting in Houston at a mall, where, like, zombie style, a guy goes down after getting shot and, aggressing on officers with a knife, and you can see blood on the ground, and then he just gets up zombie style and then turns around and tries to, like, walk away, and then he gets tased, right? And there was another video I saw recently, I think it was somewhere in Southern California, and I'll try and drop that one in, link to it in the description as well, but I think it was Donut did a breakdown on that one. But again, you have this person who just kind of out of the blue starts, menacing officers with a knife, charges them, gets shot, goes down, lays there for a minute, and then gets up and comes at them again, right? So that is one consideration when we're talking about lethal force, right? Is how many rounds are going to be effective? It's an off-the-cuff statistic, but from what I remember, the survival rate for gunshot wounds in the U.S. is somewhere in like the 80% range. That is to say, lots of people get shot, and the overwhelming majority of them survive, right? So this is not Hollywood, this is not movies. People don't get blown backwards when they get shot. I don't know if you think about high school physics, right? Force equals mass times acceleration. You've got a very, very small mass traveling at high speed, but you get an equal and opposite reaction when you shoot those rounds, right? So if the bullet's going to transmit enough force on the target to knock them backwards, then the equal opposite reaction of the recoil would also be knocking down whoever's shooting, right? So that's Hollywood, that people just like get blown backwards, right? That's not reality. So stopping power is kind of a myth, okay? And then instant and like obvious death is also a myth, right? That doesn't happen. It's not reality. And again, most gunshot wounds are are highly survivable. Dangerous, certainly don't want to catch any rounds, but they're survivable, right? And if someone is an eminent, that is happening right now, that is, they have intent, means, and opportunity to inflict serious physical injury or death, right? And you're justified in using deadly force to stop that threat, then knowing that bullets are a highly imperfect way of stopping the threat, it's bears consideration when you consider how many rounds are reasonable. Other things to consider, and if you watch the video, like, yeah, there's a high volume of fire, and anybody who's been in a police pursuit or even watched you know, like helicopter video of pursuits, oftentimes you have, you know, 10, 15 patrol cars involved in these incidents, in these pursuits, and even if each of those patrol cars are occupied by one person and not two, you know, 15 people with, you know, a standard 9mm Glock 17 is gonna have 17 rounds in the magazine plus one in the chamber, and you get 15 people shooting 3 rounds, that's 45 rounds, right? And you get 15 people shooting 6 rounds, that's 90 rounds, right? And that, you know, how many people, again, there was 13 angles, body camera on this incident, right? So the rounds stack up quickly, right? Now each officer has to have the independent, individual justification to use deadly force, right? You can't just shoot because someone else is shooting. We call that contagion fire, and it's something we actively try to train to prevent, right? You have to have the individual justification. And so each officer who's fired in that incident is going to have to be able to articulate why they did what they did and why it was objectively reasonable to do so. But, you know, each person firing 6 or so rounds in the span of a second or two, and if you watch the video, that's how quickly it happens, right? It's a second or two. Those rounds stack up very quickly, especially when you consider what we call the OODA loop, or observe, orient, decide, and act, right? And that is the interrupt, the lag time between when you perceive something and when you actually get your body to move in reaction to that. So human reaction time has a measurable lag time, and if you factor that into, you know, perceiving a threat, deciding to shoot, brain sending press trigger instructions to the finger, and then perceiving that the threat has stopped and sending stop pressing trigger instructions to the finger, there is a measurable space of time there. And so you can get a lot of rounds fired in very quick succession before officers even process the information that threat is stopped, I need to stop firing, right? So you've got that. You've got human reaction time, you've got the stopping power fallacy, okay, and you've got the, you know, human zombie phenomena, that is, they don't, you know, they can get up and still come at you, right? So all these things factor into how these things play out. And then, of course, the other issue, as I mentioned, is the gun is in the car, right? So can you shoot an unarmed person and have it be reasonable and justified? And given the totality of the circumstances, that is everything we know about it, and I gave you kind of a quick rundown, but feel free to interrogate the situation further, and, you know, by all means, watch available video if you're curious. But bottom line, if you shoot at the police, okay, you've demonstrated intent, means, and opportunity, right? And if you then bail out of the car and you're in a foot pursuit, now foot pursuits are very, very different from vehicle pursuits. Vehicles have to travel on roads, right? And so you have these broad right-of-ways with kind of clear, predictable paths that vehicles can travel for the most part. And, you know, I've experienced some exceptions to that, but generally that's how they happen. Versus a foot pursuit, which is just ripe for ambush land, right? And if somebody goes around the corner, you lose sight of them, you come charging around the corner, and they're sitting waiting for you around that corner, you know, the danger level is escalating. And I was in a foot pursuit not too long ago, and that was, you know, very present in my mind. And ultimately, a firearm ended up getting recovered from that stolen vehicle as well. But as I'm chasing this person through backyards and coming around corners, you know, you have to kind of weigh those risks, right? And do I, you know, come with gun out versus taser out? Or, you know, how am I going to deal with it if I am suddenly attacked as I'm, you know, trying to clear this corner while still not, you know, letting this person outdistance me and keeping up with them. You know, ultimately it was, you know, got into a position where I could display taser and get them to comply. But I mean, had that person come back at me suddenly, violently, it could have gone very differently. Now, I didn't know there was a handgun in the car, right? Had I known that, like these officers in Akron had known that, then, again, the situation might have gone very differently. And the fact that the car, you know, the gun is still in the car was irrelevant. Which is to say that you can only judge the reasonableness of the actions based on what the officers knew at the time. What the officers knew was they'd be shooting at them, right? And no way to know that he dumped the firearm in the car. And where there's one, there's oftentimes more, right? So even if they'd seen a gun in the car, doesn't mean he doesn't have another gun. And so you watch the video, you know, they're pursuing on foot, they're giving commands, right? And, you know, I made this video about, you know, is it reasonable to expect people to comply, just comply? You know, granted, you're going to have a little bit of that amygdala hijacking going on in this situation, but, you know, you put yourself in the shoes of Walker in those moments, right? And all the decisions that he made along the way, right? Police trying to stop him, he doesn't stop. He runs. As they're running, he shoots at the cops, right? As they continue to pursue, he bails out and runs on foot, right? And then as he's running, he turns around to charge, right? He's facing them when rounds get shot. And that is what is the kind of the triggering moment, seemingly on the video, for the officers to start shooting. And all the officers on scene suddenly made a very, you know, they had a short time to make a very critical decision about how they were going to handle that situation, given, again, the totality of the circumstances, the decisions that Walker had made up to that point. A whole bunch of them came to the conclusion that this guy is displaying intent, means, and opportunity. He's an imminent threat of serious physical injury or death. It's him or me, and should I fail to act, I'm likely to end up in a body bag, so I'm going to shoot, right? And I think that's an easily justifiable decision to make, which is to say that it's objectively reasonable. Now, there's lots of people who are just not going to be satisfied with that conclusion and want to play the Sunday quarterback game all the time, and, you know, could have, should have, would have done X, Y, or Z different. And bottom line is, you weren't there. You did not, you know, participate in this event. You don't understand the way that your brain is going to process information and how you're going to react under the circumstances unless you've done it. And watching, you know, 90 or so rounds go off in a second or two reminded me of another incident that I was involved in not too long ago. I got flagged down by some security officers who said they'd been menaced by somebody with a knife. And I was just going about my business, right? I'm just kind of driving around. I'm not, you know, really have anything on the agenda. It was early in my shift. And, you know, I just kind of listening to the radio and kind of relaxing into the evening. And, you know, I suddenly get waved down. And in the space of 30 seconds, I go from 0 to 100, where I have somebody aggressing on me who had just menaced a couple people with a knife. And in the immediate moments following the incident, I ended up tasing the guy. You know, as I recollected what happened, it felt longer, which, like, it stress does weird things to your perception of time, and everything felt like it was kind of in slow motion, right? And so the interaction I had with him in my mind felt like maybe 10-15 seconds, and I had this kind of verbal back and forth with him as he, you know, aggressed on me and verbalized his intent to, you know, inflict harm on me, until I had, you know, produced my taser, given him some admonishments, some warnings that, hey, you know, continue to approach me like this, you're going to get tased. Told him a couple times, and eventually made the decision to tase, and then went back and watched my own body cam. And I wish I could post it, but I can't. But I went back and watched my own body cam, and that whole interaction that felt much longer in my recollection actually happened in a couple seconds, right? And my reaction to stress under those circumstances is going to be different from your reaction to stress, or another officer's reaction to stress, or, you know, what have you. And all those perceptions and reactions are going to be colored and influenced by your previous experience and your level of stress inoculation. This was, how many times have you been in a situation like that? And for me, this was not my first go-around. Whereas somebody else, and I see this in training with recruits, where they get vapor lock, right? They can't make a decision because they get overwhelmed, and things are happening in their perception actually much faster than they really are, and will deliberately slow things down in like scenario-based training to give their brains time to process and catch up because they're not used to dealing with it. But yeah, it was an interesting point of comparison for me personally, just because I'd seen that time dilation effect, that interrupt or disrupt between my own perception and how things played out. And I'd imagine that, you know, sped up or slowed down, all those officers had a similar stress reaction, and that the way that they perceived the events happening might have been quite different from what you see in the camera, in the body camera. And that's going to be different for everybody, you know, in one way or another. It was just one way that, you know, stress had affected me in that particular instance. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on the topic. I think it was an interesting incident, and we'll see if it continues to be controversial now that Akron PD's released all this body cam. You know, but yeah, those are my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Like the video if you enjoyed. Feel free to share. Get other people involved in the conversation. Inspiring and uplifting as always. It's been fun. We'll see you on the next one.